remember going to work and I remember driving in. I had this feeling like something really bad's going to happen. Tensions were really, really high in both communities.
A house was taken over at Farrington Court in Ardoyne at 9:30 on Saturday morning, October 23rd, 1993.
A Saturday afternoon would have been your big shopping day, big racing day, big football day. I had a newsagent, myself and my son, who was helping me in the shop at the time, had this idea of setting a stall up. So we were on the street trading.
The blue Ford Escort was taken from the house. The car disappeared and is next seen at 3 p.m. at the junction of Brompton Park and Crumlin Road.
At the time I owned a taxi company on the Woodville. I had my wife in the car. My wife wanted to go out and do a bit of shopping.
The car was parked in Berlin Street on the Shankill Road.
Being October, it was a nice day. I thought that day that I'd got my children on a good track. They were both doing well at school and life was going places.
2 terrorists dressed in white coats entered Frizzell's between 1:10 and 1:15 p.m. The bomb in a sizable box, a brown box.
We were getting everything ready for Daddy's funeral. His coffin was brought home on the Friday night and we'd made arrangements for Evelyn and Michael to bring up some things from the Shankill on the Saturday.
After they bought the wreath, they just walked down into Mr. Frizzell's shop to get crab sticks. Michelle loved the crab sticks.
When we got to the fish shop, Frizzell's, she looked in the window and there was Willix. And she said she was going to go in and buy some. But I couldn't have stopped her going in. It's what she wanted. It's what she did when she was down there. And I was looking through the glass and I just pointed to her and said, I'm going into Jackie Phillips, that when she'd finished to come into me.
I got to the Sabre Crossing and I remember my dad saying to me, he says, Graham, there's loads of people here. He says, you cross over, I have to go and do a message. And the bomb went off.
Three members of the IRA planted a bomb in Frizzell's face shop on a packed Shankill Road.
There was no warning or anything, just the bang went off and everybody running, the thing came down round them. The people are all, I'm sure they're all killed that was in it.
The IRA claimed that its intended target was the leadership of the UFF that met regularly in an office above the shop.
I seen a woman there and her head bashed in, her arm off. And I seen a man there and I seen a child's pram blew up.
9 people lost their lives that day and scores of others were wounded. Thomas Begley, one of the bombers, was also killed, and the other bomber, Sean Kelly, was left gravely injured. The getaway driver has never been caught. The IRA chose a busy Saturday to carry out the attack. Frizzell's fish shop at the heart of the Shankill was crammed with lunchtime shoppers.
That part of the road on the side of the fish shop was just a mecca for people walking about, especially at that time on a Saturday. Mr. Frizzell, he was in first name terms with hundreds of people, and you probably could have walked into the shop with half a dozen people in front of you and he would have had your order ready because he knew what you were coming in for. So he did, and the daughter, you know, his daughter and his wife, the whole family was exactly the same. They were good, hard-working, decent people.
Bram, what was the climate like in 1993, 25 years ago? What was it like?
I suppose grim would be the best way to describe it. One of the most violent years since the earliest days of the Troubles.
That year, the IRA bombed Warrington, killing 3-year-old Jonathan Ball and 12-year-old Tim Parry. Loyalists shot dead 4 Catholic workmen in a van in Castle Rock. Tit-for-tat murders became commonplace.
You go into a house to see some man who, 5 or 6 minutes earlier was having a cup of tea at the fireplace, and
He's now lying in the fireplace and his wife screaming and his kids. There's no sense to it.
The heartbroken parents of teenager Damien Walsh watched their son's coffin being taken from their home in Poleglass. Their eldest son was shot dead by UFF gunmen on Thursday night as he worked in the coal bunker shop at the Dairy Farm shopping centre in Twinbrook. The 17-year-old was the UFF's sixth and youngest murder victim last week.
For the first time in the conflict, Loyalists murdered more people than Republicans. A vicious young Loyalist leadership had taken command of the UFF. In West Belfast, it was led by Johnny Adair.
Was it Johnny Adair who had the clout to be ordering these attacks?
I think sometimes the legend becomes bigger than reality. He was undoubtedly a significant figure in the UDA-UFF organisation in the Shankill. His emergence as one of their military commanders coincided with this surge in Loyalist activity.
And what was the Loyalists thinking about why they were doing this?
Well, I suppose in their thinking, well, one, they thought they were going to be sold out in some way.
The UFF leadership had long suspected a nationalist conspiracy to secretly drive them into a united Ireland.
Gerry Adams had been spotted visiting John Hume at his home in Derry, and that caused great suspicion, particularly within the Loyalist community. What are John Hume and Gerry Adams up to? It quickly became John Hume, Gerry Adams and Albert Reynolds. That became a pan-nationalist front in the language of the Loyalists. There was a big surge in violence. I remember a conversation with Johnny Adair, September 1993. I think in that UDA office on the Shankill Road from memory. And he made this comment to me that the organisation he was part of had attacked Sinn Féin at the bottom, the middle and the top of the ladder. But as well as these very targeted attacks on Sinn Féin, a different language began to emerge in Loyalist statements, saying their intention was mass murder. And on a number of occasions, the IRA targeted Johnny Adair and they were trying to kill him. This is an IRA interview published in Unfoblocked, 14th of October 1993. No one should be under any illusions. Those involved with the Loyalist death squads, as the IRA described them, will be held accountable for their actions. So that surge in Loyalist activity, that targeting of Republicans, that wider targeting of the nationalist community, had brought a decision from the IRA at the very top of the organisation, what someone many years later described to me as an operational imperative to take out Adair and Co.
The plan was to assassinate the notorious Loyalist Johnny Adair, the so-called Brigadier of C Company.
The Shankill Road was busy with lunchtime shoppers when the attack happened. Two men dressed in white coats walked into Frizzell's fish shop at 1:15 and placed the bomb on the floor.
Just after lunchtime, Charlie Butler was driving down Berlin Street onto the Shankill when a call came over his radio.
That would come over my taxi radio. It was, holy fuck, a bomb has just went off in Frizzell's. That was the exact word.
It sounded like a jet fighter going immediately above your head.
Warned my wife, stay in the car.
The windows of the car shook. So it did, and we just got out and run.
Everyone just started squealing and just started running down the road towards the bomb. When I got to the zebra crossing, we stepped over some bodies and people that we thought hadn't made it.
What did you see?
I seen slaughter. There was people lying all over the street here.
You tried to help those that you could hear crying, and then you realised as people got there, there's people buried in the rubble.
the rubble just was lying all strewn across the road. There was a pile like a small mountain here, and I just went up, and they're probably about here, and got to the top and just get on with everybody else, started passing bricks back to people, didn't know who they were behind me.
So you're on your knees lifting bricks, knowing that you might find a human body?
You might find people, yeah.
I think around about 1:10 we were called for a raid, which is the bomb. We were initially told it was a Berlin Arms pub, and I have to say, as soon as they said the Berlin Arms pub on a Saturday, it was a bright sunny day, I thought, my God.
Everybody was talking about it, and they were saying it was the Berlin Arms bar was blew up, and I thought nobody belonged to me would be in a bar on a Saturday afternoon.
As the A&E consultant on duty, when I heard that a bomb had gone off on the Shankill Road, my thought was just get there, get to the hospital, because I expected that the consequences would be horrific.
I don't know if anybody could ever describe it other than what it was a living hell. That's as easy as that. To hear human beings scream, to hear people scream and cry like that, no one should have to hear it. No one.
I'm wondering, you were so stunned by what you were experiencing. I'm wondering what they were experiencing. So they're injured. They have no idea what's just happened. There's this thick white dust around them, and they're dying.
And they're dying, yeah.
Gina Murray had been shopping on the Shankill with her daughter Leanne before they had become separated.
Tell me about your daughter.
She was just turned 13.
How close were you?
As close as a mother and daughter can be. She was our baby. And where I went, she went.
While Alan McBride's wife Sharon worked in her father's fish shop, Alan was at home looking after their daughter, 2-year-old Zoe.
So Sharon asked me if I would drop her off to the shop, and when I dropped off Shankill, she was getting in the car, and remember the last words I said to her? I asked her, did you remember to tape the football for me? And she forgot. And it was like a cardinal sin. I can remember, saying, you stupid, so-and-so.
Last time I saw her, she was standing at the back of the fish counter, and all I said to her was, I'll see you in 5 minutes.
You think to yourself, if it's a bomb, there must have been a warning. Maybe she heard the warning and run down the street. So I clung to the hope that she'd got out.
The bomb was constructed of 5 pounds of Semtex high explosive connected to an improvised timer. The fuse was set for 11 seconds.
It would appear the bomb exploded while it was still being carried. No seat of the explosion.
In other words, it wasn't put down?
So that's it. It hadn't been placed.
As soon as I got out, I seen a woman lying there really badly injured, and there was 2 people attending her.
When we ran outside, I couldn't see anything.
The clouds of white dust, thick white dust, just covered everything.
So you had to keep coming in, back out to get water into your eyes, but then getting back in again because you knew you had to.
Pungent smell, people lying with blood coming out of all sorts of injuries.
The dust also becomes a bit of a fog, and it becomes a bit of a shield, if you like. It protects you from what you're witnessing.
It was a scene out of a film that you were living in. It wasn't reality. It wasn't the Shankill.
We arrived at this scene of total carnage. There were bodies lying on the road, and that we had a body lying in front of the ambulance as well. Basically, we were dragged from the ambulance by people just to bring us over to different people that were injured.
13-year-old Graham Harrison was on his way to watch Linfield with his dad.
Me and my dad would have walked down the road to go to Jumble Street Blues, which was a supporters club that we used to go from every Saturday.
As he reached the zebra crossing, he took the full brunt of the explosion.
Someone put, I think it was a plank of wood or metal or something, that collapsed onto my chest. Blood was coming out of me from everywhere.
People running away from it, crying. There was this woman shouting at me, give blood, quick, get down to the hospital, give blood.
A local councillor had made an appeal for blood donation, and people, do you remember? They were coming with their sleeves rolled up. Where can I give blood?
That was their way of helping, of doing something. They just got angry when when they were told that it wasn't needed.
It was scary. I didn't know where I was going to die. I just remember the smell of smoke, the ringing in my ears, the taste of blood. And I remember getting into the ambulance, and I just didn't know where I was going to die at. All I could think about is seeing my mum. And I just prayed to God that I could see her one more time.
As I was running, there was a man laying on the ground, and he got his hands behind his back. But what first drew my attention to him was his face. It got blood on the side of his face. And he says, help me.
He had what I could make out to be like a house brick just protruding from the back of his skull. He was still breathing. He had multiple fractures. I could see bones coming through his clothing. Did our best with whatever bleed we could arrest and maintained his airway and brought him to the major casualty.
You were starting to dig at one part, trying to find someone. You could hear a squeal from another part, or you hear a groan from another part, and you were moving to there.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who wanted to help.
They were climbing over emergency vehicles. They were being sick on bodies.
There was 10 people lifting a stretcher because everybody wanted to do something. Everybody wanted to play their part.
The crowd was just getting so intense that it was starting to impede us doing our job, basically. But it was quite understandable why, because there was people thought they had relatives in there.
And you're lifting brick by brick off, are you?
We're lifting brick by brick off because you were scared of maybe if there was someone maybe standing on top of them or standing to hurt them.
You're digging and you don't realise. You're looking down and your hands are bleeding. So they are. And you're wondering, have I found someone? And you're going like that and you realise, no, I've cut myself there, or I've cut myself there.
And there was people like making a chain and just passing stuff back. And I just happened to be sort of one of the ones at the top of the chain.
The next ambulance to arrive couldn't get by because of mine and the crowd. So as I run back to my ambulance, I'd left the keys in the ambulance and it was gone. But luckily some bystander had jumped in it and drove it up to the scene. The ambulance, which was taken by the member of the public who probably had good intentions, but they may well have loaded that up with as many patients with broken arms and cut fingers and whatever, and loaded that up thinking they were doing a good job getting 6 people to hospital. But we don't need them 6 people to hospital. We need the person who's trapped under the rubble and who's barely breathing or who has massive trauma. 2 of my colleagues, they crawled up to the top of the rubble and just assumed the role of identifying human remains and fish. And they were separating that as they dug through the rubble. And
you could see eyes in the rubble, and it was nearly impossible to distinguish whether it was a human eye or fish. I could hear breath sounds. I remember shouting at the scene for there to be quiet, which would seem like an impossibility at the time.
And out of everything that was happening, and all the noise that was happening, all of a sudden there was nothing.
The silence revealed John Frizzell, the fish shop owner, buried among the rubble.
He was still alive. I was able to put my stethoscope on his throat, and unfortunately Mr. Frizzell died as we were digging him free.
As I looked round, there was a body brought out, and I just kept saying, "Can you see if it's Leanne?" I says, "Just look for her purple trousers."
There's a character about the Shankill called Moke Devlin, and he was pinned with a big massive wooden beam from the back of his throat up against the wall of the fish shop, and this had lodged in where he couldn't move, and he actually thought he was dead till we started seeing the eyes moving.
He had been impaled by a wooden rafter through one of his shoulders. His eye had been blown from its socket. It was just hanging loose on his face. We cut his body free from the wreckage, and I know now that he survived.
Alan McBride had been oblivious to the attack.
We drove down onto Shankill, parked in Berlin Street, and just walked to the corner where the Berlin Arms is, and just looked up the street, and just the scene that greeted me, just with the people looking for body parts, and the smell of burning, and the smell of of debris and of explosive. I knew that there was nobody getting out of that.
What do you do in a situation like that? You turn the corner and you see that? Like, do you run towards it? Do you freeze? What do you do?
I think I froze. I can remember people must have knew who it was because it was taken quite quickly in the little Methodist bookshop, which was just about 2 doors down.
The church cafe was commandeered as a holding area for relatives.
Mrs. Frizzell was in there, and she said to me, "Are you all right?" I went, "No, my daughter's in your shop." She says, "I've only just left it."
When she saw that bomb go off, she knew it was her daughter and her husband and all those other people that were in there, A guy came in to say that he'd found a leg, and I can remember people shuffling him outside and telling him to shut up, because obviously he didn't know when he went into that wee bookshop that the families were starting to gather there.
We found body parts, which turned out to be a female who was lying face down.
What did you find?
I found a child. I didn't know she was a child at the time. I had seen a massive black curly hair.
I sort of moved a stone away, and then that's when I saw a child's face looking at me through the rubble. And so we started, I could tell the child was dead, but for some reason I just thought if we can just somehow manage to free this child, we might be able to resuscitate them.
How old was that little girl?
I think 14. You can't do that, Stephen. And forget about it.
I asked somebody if they'd seen her, and she said she'd see a girl with dark hair, but she wasn't sure whether it was Leanne or not. So we went to the Royal with hope that she was one of the injured. We walked in and I gave Leanne's description. Long dark hair, purple trousers, bomber jacket, Mickey Mouse watch.
So we're digging and digging, trying to free the child, and then I saw another arm underneath the child, which was another child. Sorry.
That was someone with pinky coloured cerise coat on. Myself and whoever was in this side all stood back. People stood back, and they let other people come in, move stuff away, and take bodies out.
We'd been sort of trampling up and down on the site, and I sort of felt that I'd been sort of standing on top of the children, and if I had been able to get them out quicker, they might have made a difference, I don't know, but it's just something that I've lived with for 25 years.
Someone brought a stretcher, and I lifted her from the torso, laid her on the stretcher, and only we were so careful with her because the child was just rolling off.
What do you mean?
How do you say we had hurting families, Steve? We lifted her, and it was like lifting jelly. It was like lifting jelly.
What do you mean?
The whole body was just so soft, so soft. Her arms, it felt as if there was no bones in her. Whether they disintegrated or were blew to pieces inside her, or...
See, I don't know if you realise some of what you've said out loud, okay? But among all of that mayhem, you and other people on the Shankill lifted that little girl out as carefully as you could.
It had to be, Stephen, had to be respect. You know, what do you say? It was a school kid, and that was, well, bar going to Roseland, that was our last journey. It was then I went back to Hugh Smith, and I says, Hughie, they've found another body here, but we don't know how many. Hugh said, do you know anybody? I said, no, I don't know anybody.
Among the chaos, the world's media started to arrive at the scene, trying to piece together the story of what happened. At that moment, and obviously you've been able to look at this since that day, where was it there? Where were they all on that day, the IRA trying to target them? Were they upstairs? Where were they?
No, they weren't there. I mean, there was some talk that Adair may have been on a prison visit.
There was a prisoner's bus left on a Saturday morning, and Ada took a bundle of papers that was ordered down to the bus. I knew for a fact that once the prisoner's bus left, the office was closed. So there was nobody there, and there never was anybody there on a Saturday afternoon.
I knew, as everyone else knew, there was going to be a reaction. I saw Johnny Adair on that road just a short time after the explosion. I saw another of the UDA leaders going through the cordon, speaking some angry words. You could taste the anger. You could feel it. And I suppose, in my mind, I was thinking about what next.
The Nationalist MP for West Belfast, Dr. Joe Hendren, visited the scene of the bombing this morning to sympathise with local people. Some, however, were hostile.
Bring Sinn Féin up, Joe! Let him see it!
How unsafe was Joe coming in there simply because of his background?
Well, you couldn't have put a risk assessment on that. You don't know because people were angry, obviously angry at the bombers, Let's put it like this, it was a brave thing, an act of leadership that Joe Hendren did that day, and he was remembered for it.
I can remember the then Assistant Chief Constable Ronnie Flanagan coming to me at the scene and quietly saying to me that he believed one of those who had been responsible for the bomb was in the Mater Hospital, and saying something to me along the lines, for God's sake, don't say that out loud, because they would have known what would have happened.
One of the bombers, Sean Kelly, had been caught up in the blast. He had been placed inside the same ambulance as some of the victims.
Personal friends of mine that were blew up, injured, lying in an ambulance, and asking the paramedic to treat the poor guy beside him because he looked worse than he was.
I remember my dad just saying, just look after him too. them too, but never knew it was Sean Kelly.
I have to be quite honest, Stephen. I'm glad I wasn't one of the ones that helped them.
What do you mean?
I don't think I could live. I don't think I could live with myself.
Do you hate him?
Don't think hate's a word. Don't think hate's a word.
So when you think of him, what do you think?
Despise him. Detest him. Put yourself in his place. Young guy caught up in the troubles. Not every young guy carried bombs into places through women and kids.
Sean Kelly, apparently he was in one side of resuscitation room and there was other people on the other side. And I remember thinking at that time, oh my goodness, you know, I hope the people don't realise that he's here.
I remember my dad saying to me afterwards that, you know, about this woman he was talking to, and she says, if you knew who I was, you wouldn't want to be talking to me. And then it was read out that with the family of Sean Kelly.
They had them in the same room?
Well, they didn't know who was who, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but they did.
Just, yeah, so...
by chance?
You know, by chance. And I suppose it's the other, I mean, this place being a very sectarian place, when somebody's called Sean, you knew they're not from the Shankill Road, so we knew right away that this must have been the guy that was one of the bombers, you know.
Sean Kelly maybe doesn't know it, but he owes his life to the Shankill people.
The hospitals were thronged with people searching for their loved ones.
You knew that people had been pulled out, but nobody knew the number of deaths or injuries or anything else. And what actually happened was the only way you could find out then, it wasn't a matter of ringing around your relatives to say, are you okay? There was no mobile phones, was to go to the casualty and sit there until you tried to get a name.
It was like a powder keg outside the A&E department. They were desperate for news, and they were in danger of flooding the entire department where our surgeons and teams were working.
I remember stopping at the Mater Hospital, and because of the crowds of relatives we couldn't get in, so I had to stop on the Crumlin Road and just run in off the Crumlin Road with our patients. It was just utter chaos. But your first thoughts were to get the patients off and get straight back up again.
The faces of the people knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, I think that will never, ever leave you.
Amidst the chaos, people were still unaccounted for. Diane's brother Michael, partner Evelyn, and 7-year-old daughter Michelle had still not returned from buying a wreath for Diane's father's funeral.
Alarm bells started to ring then because they hadn't appeared, and they'd went out just before the bomb, and we thought maybe they were involved in it. So my uncle rang round and his friend rang hospitals, and they told us all the fatalities had been accounted for. So Evelyn's mummy thought that they were in somebody's house nosing, or they're helping somebody.
We knew that one of the dead had already arrived and had been taken down to a back clinical room. And so we came to a formal agreement that should be designated as a temporary mortuary, because we knew that from the ambulance crews that there would be a lot of fatalities.
Very difficult times, because we often had to break bad news to people that their loved ones had died.
By now, the bomb site had become very dangerous.
The old wooden beams, one of them cracked, and it sounded like, when you were in there, the crack had went off 5 minutes before it, and people started squealing and running and shouting, there's another bomb, there's another bomb. A secondary device didn't matter. It was about saving who was there. You're hoping to dig down and find that it's just rubble, that there wasn't as many people there, or wasn't many people buried onto it as we first thought. But then you realise, I've found a body here. You know, when you drop your head, you know, this is just someone's relative, this is someone's son, someone's wife, someone's daughter.
After extricating the 2 dead children, we had to focus on this girl who had basically catastrophic injuries. Her legs had been blown off in the explosion. She was obviously dead, lying face down, and members of the public were pulling her body to try and free her from the rubble, and she had a piece of metal still piercing through her thigh. So I put my hand on the metal and just literally had to rip this thing from her thigh to get her body free. And just at that, I think someone pulled her body, and I didn't even realise it. I ended up lacerating my hand.
Sadly, by this time, the chances of finding anyone else alive was remote.
Probably about 4 or 5 in the afternoon we were taken over to the Mater Hospital, but there's nothing, I suppose, to finally prepare you for actually hearing the worst. And how it was told to me was that they came over and they had Sharon's wedding ring and her engagement ring, and they asked me if I recognised him. I said if I did, and they said, well, look, these were taken off the body of a young woman that was found dead at the scene. And
your world collapses.
Yeah.
More and more of them were hearing where their relative was and leaving. And so the group who were left were going to be the group who got the worst news.
They started to then clear some of the loose rubble to move it away, just so we can get right down to the bare ground to make sure that there was nobody left.
It was then that I was handed a body part. I didn't know whether it was a man or woman or child, but I assumed when I was putting this person into the ambulance that the police stopped me and asked me, was it male or female? And the only thing I could say was, I think it's a man, because the only thing left of this body part was a shoe with the foot still attached. And it was a male shoe.
I remember Larry bringing me a brown paper bag, about the size of a bin bag, and handing it to me, and that's when he said, that's human remains. I remember the weight of the bag, and I remember thinking, a very silly, stupid thing as I was lifting it into the back of the ambulance, that I hoped the bag didn't burst. It was so heavy. And I set it on the floor of the ambulance. I brought it down to the Mater, and when we cleared the remains, they were taken up to Foster's, up to the morgue.
Unfolded them onto a mortuary slab, well, the mortician did. And it turned out that was Thomas Begley, who was the other bomber involved in the Shankill Bomb.
As night fell and the search for survivors finished, Gina scoured the hospitals for news of her daughter Leanne.
I gave Leanne's description, and 2 CID detectives came out, and they asked would we follow them, and in the car we turned into Foster Green Mortuary, and that's when I knew that she wasn't with us anymore. And I asked could I go in and see her, and he turned around, he says, have you ever seen a bomb victim? I said no. He says that her body swells up, and they took me into the mortuary, and they unzipped this bag, black bag, only so far down, and Leanne was in it. She'd got rubble in her hair, and I asked her to get up, to wake up, and to get off, and to come home with me, because she wouldn't like her hair being in that state. Then after that, I said I had to get home to Gary, because he was at home and he didn't know what was going on.
What's that moment like between you two when you see each other and you know you've lost Leanne?
Couldn't leave her side. Could have.
He couldn't believe that was his sister.
That was us more or less finished at that bomb. There was no requirement for us to go back. And in fact, I ended up having to go to City Casualty to be treated for my injury.
By that time the scene was clear, and we then returned to our base for a debrief. I looked around the room and everybody, including myself, was covered in dust, and our dry mouths with working with the dust, and our uniforms were filthy and our ambulances were filthy, and We were just starting to come down from what we had witnessed and taken part.
Later that night, with no news of Michael, Evelyn, Aunt Michelle, Charlie Butler went next door to his sister's house.
My sister had seen it on the TV. Everyone had seen it on the TV. They'd seen me on the TV, had seen me in the rubble, had seen me carrying a stretcher. Obviously, her first question was it happening? Or Michael or Michelle? And obviously I knew it wasn't. And I says, look, you know them, they'll be in the town. They'll be in the town, they'll be okay. Don't be worrying about them.
7:45, 8 o'clock, they started to think there's more to it, because somebody has bound to have seen them from 1 o'clock today, but we couldn't find them.
A detective come up to the house and had said that there was 3 unidentified bodies in Foster Greens, and it was 2 adults and a female child. They actually had said, had they anything distinguishing on them that they could distinguish with? And Bobby had said that Michelle had a new cerise coat on, and Stephen.
The woman who you had seen with the cerise coat, when you were digging into the rubble and you turned round?
Yeah, was my great niece.
Ah.
Well, I knew that if Michelle was away, they were away. You know, they were just inseparable. And it seems like even in death, they're inseparable. Seven years old.
That evening, the IRA issued an official statement.
This is a transcript of the IRA statement issued October 23rd, 1993. The IRA today targeted a regular meeting of UFF activists at the Shankill Road UDA headquarters. 8 hours after the operation, not all our volunteers are accounted for. We can only conclude at this stage that those volunteers are among those who were tragically and unintentionally killed by a premature detonation of this device. We regret all innocent deaths and understand the grief felt by those loved ones of all those who died today. And they sign off by talking about an operation that had gone tragically wrong.
Unintentional?
That's their words, but you know,
Do you believe them?
Well, what I've said to you a number of times, Stephen, that was a bomb that was going to explode within seconds. There is no way that you could have got that area clear of civilians.
And yet the car to take Begley and Kelly away was around the corner.
Was around the corner in Berlin Street. We took statements, you know, from the IRA over the years, you know, where they would have talked about a car bomb being in place or a fan bomb being in place, and they would have said, you know, there's 30 minutes, or there's 40 minutes, or there's 50 minutes, or there's 60 minutes to clear the area. But if you're really after Johnny Adair and the UFF leadership in an upstairs office in that building, you're not getting a warning of minutes. You're getting a few seconds. And that was never going to be enough on the Shankill Road on a Saturday afternoon. So they must also have understood that going for Adair meant that they were going to kill civilians or injure civilians who got in the way of that bomb.
Within hours, the inevitable response from loyalism followed.
This is the Northern Command of the UFF issued the following statement. This afternoon, the loyalist people of West Belfast have been on the receiving end of a blatantly indiscriminate bomb attack, supposedly aimed at the leadership of the UFF. The number of women and children killed and injured is still unclear, but lends a lie to the false claims. As from 1800 hours tonight, that's 6 o'clock on Saturday, the day of the bomb, All brigade area active service units of the UFF across Ulster will be fully mobilised. John Hume, Gerry Adams and the nationalist electorate will pay a heavy, heavy price for today's atrocity, which was signed, sealed and delivered by the cutting edge of the Pan-Nationalist Front. And finally, to the perpetrators of today's atrocity, we say this: there will be no hiding place. Time is on our side. And to Hume, John Hume, the leader of the SDLP, in conversation with Gerry Adams at that time, is this part of your peace process?
I think that's quite chilling.
Well, of course it is. Of course it is, but also inevitable. Almost declaring war with the Catholic nationalist community, trying to say to them, you better get the IRA to stop, or else. After that statement has been issued by the UFF, there's a young man, Martin Moran, 22, a Catholic, takeaway delivery driver, killed.
Soon after the bombing, the loyalist terror group, the Ulster Freedom Fighters, warned the nationalist community it would pay a heavy price. Hours later, a phony order for a takeaway meal lured a Catholic man to a loyalist area of Belfast, where a terrorist shot him in the head.
I thought this was it. There's going to be a civil war now, and I went home and locked my doors, and I really was frightened.
Last night, some local people openly voiced support for the threats of violent reprisals from the loyalist terrorists. Others were just resigned.
They'll just retaliate.
Oh, you're right, well, all the way
This time next week, I'll be Catholic families doing that with it.
Sean Fox, 72.
The target, a pensioner, a Catholic man in his 70s, was shot dead at his home in a suburb north of Belfast. The man had been shot in the head several times. One of his daughters arrived at the house.
There seemed no bottom to what could happen. There seemed no depths to which people would not stoop.
Two young brothers, Gerard Kearns, 22, and Rory Kearns, 18, shot dead by the UVF in their family home.
The brothers were watching television after the family had celebrated their sister Roisin's 11th birthday. She thought the masked terrorists were friends playing a Halloween joke as they rushed past her.
James Cameron and Mark Rogers, that's at the council yard, which they spread with gunfire.
It seems nothing the gunmen won't do. 60 shots were fired in the most enclosed of compounds. Bullet cartridges lay all around, so too did the bodies.
And then you get to the grey steel shooting. And among the dead, someone 19 and someone 81.
A massacre, the scale and brutality of which was scarcely believable. The bar had been full last night when the two masked gunmen burst in. They had shot indiscriminately. Eyewitnesses said one of the killers kept firing till his gun was empty, reloaded, then started firing again. One local priest said the killers had made the sickest of jokes seconds before pulling the trigger.
As far as I know, the man came in with, two men came in and said, trick or treat, then sprayed the whole place with bullets.
So that was the madness of that week in October.
Was that a pure venomous hatred for anything Catholic?
That was matching the body count. That was the statistical war, Stephen. I remember David Irvine talking at one stage about going back as far as Bloody Friday, and he made this comment about loyalists wanting to return the serve. That's what that week was about.
Not a young couple whose father was murdered in retaliation for Shankill bombing. I went up and met people in Greysteel who were murdered. And believe you me, they're no different to me. None.
The families now had to prepare for the funerals.
The UDA on the Shankill brought up a wreath to my mother-in-law's house where I was. And wanted to hand it over on behalf of loyalist prisoners, and I threw it in the bin, Stephen, because as far as I was concerned, the IRA and loyalists were just two sides of the one coin.
And they were bringing them home. Michael's father had passed away by a heart attack, and he was lying in the house on a coffin. And We had to lift the furniture out. They had put 3 coffins in the living room.
My oldest sister, she, in all the pandemonium, she was trying to get my daddy to get up out of the coffin to help us.
The worst part of it, Stephen, was that they had to be sealed.
What happened to Leanne after she died? Did she come back home?
Not straight away. She was sent to the funeral parlour. We had the coffin open for a few hours so people could pay their respects.
There was still the old bit of rubble in her hair. It was sort of, it wasn't washed properly, and her face was all puffed up.
When they'd cut her long hair, she'd have hated that.
I looked like a different person.
Then when the coffin came home, it was closed. They wouldn't let us keep it open.
Why not?
Because it's bad for everyone to see a bomb victim. Because she really didn't look like herself.
She wasn't my Leanne.
Graham had been in intensive care with a punctured lung and didn't know if he would ever see again. He hadn't been told of the extent of the bomb.
I don't think they wanted to tell me how many people died. I didn't know until I seen them on a wee TV, seen the funerals that day, and that was the first time they told me 9 people had died. I think that was the hardest thing to take in, the 9 people had died. I was just grateful to be alive.
Can you remember the days of the funerals on the road?
I do. I remember, the big thing I remember is the shipyard men and the unions and the workers coming up the Shankill downing tools and walking up for a show of solidarity.
I think what comforted a lot of the families and a lot of the people in the Shankill was the support they got from across the communities, the support they got from the Catholic community, who was outraged and horrified.
The coffin of 7-year-old Michelle Baird leaves her home at Forth River Parade, the first of the 2 child victims of the bombing to be buried. Her coffin was followed by those of her mother Evelyn and father Michael Morrison. They died together in Saturday's bombing. Today they were buried together. The cortege grew as it moved down Glencairn towards St Andrew's Church.
Coming down over that Glencairn road, if you look back and seen the amount of people were there, it was amazing.
I couldn't get to the house. I couldn't get near it. There's thousands of people. So I waited in line like everybody else and waited their coffins came.
Less than a mile away, Republicans prepared to bury Thomas Begley with full paramilitary trappings.
And there's Jerry Adams carrying the coffin.
But he had to, Stephen. He had to, and that's what... Well, I think anyone... So for Adams not to have carried the coffin would have been for Adams to have turned his back on the IRA in a moment of embarrassment for that organisation, given what had happened on the Shankill Road.
That was like a slap in the face to my family.
It definitely wasn't easy. I mean, it was like another knife going into me, because he was a very, very public person. I mean, I didn't know who Sean Kelly was. I didn't know who Thomas Begley was. I didn't know who the driver was that day. But everybody knew who Jerry Adams was.
And I want to say this about Thomas Begley and Sean Kelly. They have become the bogeymen of October 1993. Does anyone believe or think that Thomas Begley and Sean Kelly planned the Shankill bombing?
I think, personally, those 2 were sent out not to come back. I think they knew that bomb was going to go off. Those 2 wee boys were sent out that day
Who gave the order for the Shankill bomb?
You tell me.
Well, I don't know. Who made the bomb? Who decided that that bomb would explode within seconds? So, as Begley and Sean Kelly are placed on the stage as bogeymen, others who had much more to do with that day, they exit the stage without any sense of accountability.
For a human being to be able to walk in and see kids and mums and dads around them, you know, I apportion a lot of blame on those two individuals.
Oh, no.
They see these people around them.
No.
They walk
No,
in.
Stephen.
They walk in.
Stephen, I'm not excusing.
I know you're not.
I'm not excusing for 1 minute what Thomas Begley and Sean Kelly did. Are Thomas Begley and Sean Kelly the whole truth about the Shankill bomb? No, they're not. What I'm saying is they're part of that truth.
Will we ever get the truth?
No, we won't. No, we won't. Maybe the convulsion of that period, the horror of that period, the madness and the sadness of that period, that walking to the edge was needed to get us to where we are today. But what a bloody price the dead of October 1993 and the dead of many other similar periods paid for that peace. An unbelievable price.
I think I'm going to have to stop.
Don't go any.
No, don't go any further.
Don't go any further. Come on. So you just can't. You just. Are you okay?
You alright?
When I'm in bed on my own at night, I'll cry myself to sleep or talk to a picture. You should never bury a child. You expect your children to bury you.
We don't want it to go back to the old ways, sure we don't. The old Northern Ireland.
I don't want anybody to go through what I'm going through. It's too heartbreaking.
Okay.
Our hearts are heavy for those who lost loved ones. There are families, and the scar that they bear is an empty chair at the table. All over the Shankill community today and all of the churches, a prayer will be read out. So this morning we join with sisters and brothers all over the Shankill community. We remember John Desmond Frizzell, his daughter Sharon McBride, George Williamson and his wife Gillian. We remember Michael Morrison, his partner Evelyn Baird, and their little daughter Michelle, aged 7. We remember Wilma McKee, aged 38, mother of 2 children, and Leanne Murray, aged just 13.
That last image I have of her, it's nice to see her face, the smile on her face, and me standing trying to make her understand I was going in another shop. I think I shouldn't have left her there. I should have said no. You can't go in. I should have made her come with me. But I couldn't, it's what she wanted.